Imagine spending 15 years perfecting your craft, saving lives with hands so steady they could thread a needle in a hurricane. Now imagine walking into your workplace one Tuesday morning and being told you don't belong. This is the story of Dr. Marcus Bennett, a cardiovascular surgeon whose expertise was never questioned until the day it suddenly was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the pre-dawn quiet of Riverside Medical Center. Dr. Marcus Bennett pushed through the glass doors of the main entrance at exactly 5:23 a.m., just as he had every Tuesday for the past 3 years. His surgical clogs made a familiar rhythm against the polished linoleum as he navigated the maze of corridors that led to the cardiac wing. Marcus carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned his place through relentless dedication. At 38, he possessed the kind of focused intensity that made residents step aside when he walked past. His dark eyes moved with the precision of someone who saw details others missed, who could spot a hairline fracture in an X-ray from across a room, who could feel an irregular heartbeat through layers of skin and muscle. The morning air still held the crisp bite of October in Portland, Oregon. Outside, the city was slowly awakening, but inside Riverside Medical, the night shift was preparing to hand over their responsibilities to the day team. Marcus nodded to the security guard at the front desk, a man named Frank who had worked the overnight shift for 12 years and knew every doctor's routine by heart. "Morning, Dr. Bennett. Big surgery today?" "Triple bypass," Marcus replied, adjusting the leather messenger bag on his shoulder. "Should be interesting." Frank smiled and returned to his crossword puzzle. Marcus continued toward the elevators, his mind already shifting into the methodical preparation mode that had become second nature. Every surgery began hours before the first incision, with mental rehearsals, equipment checks, and the kind of meticulous planning that separated good surgeons from exceptional ones. The elevator carried him to the 3rd floor, where the cardiac surgical suites occupied the entire East Wing. Marcus had requested the 7 a.m. slot specifically because he preferred the calm that came with early morning procedures. Fewer distractions, fewer interruptions, just the pure focus of medicine at its most precise. He stepped into the locker room and began the familiar ritual of transformation. Street clothes gave way to surgical scrubs. His watch, a graduation gift from his parents, went into the small locker along with his wallet and keys. The simple act of changing clothes had always felt symbolic to Marcus, like shedding the outside world to enter a space where only skill and knowledge mattered. Dr. Marcus Bennett had not arrived at this moment by accident. Born in Oakland to a postal worker father and a high school English teacher mother, he had grown up in a household where education was treated like sacred ground. His parents, James and Dorothy Bennett, had worked double shifts and taken second jobs to ensure their 3 children could pursue whatever dreams they dared to imagine. Marcus had discovered his calling during the high school biology class, when Mrs. Rodriguez brought in a preserved pig's heart and challenged the students to identify its components. While his classmates grimaced and complained, Marcus found himself fascinated by the intricate architecture of chambers and vessels. He spent the entire lunch period studying the specimen, tracing the pathways that carried life through the body. His undergraduate years at Stanford had been a blur of pre-med requirements, laboratory sessions, and late-night study groups. He graduated summa cum laude with a degree in biochemistry, then entered medical school at UCSF. The competition was fierce, the workload relentless, but Marcus thrived in the environment of constant challenge. It was during his 3rd-year rotations that he first scrubbed into a cardiac surgery. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the attending surgeon, had invited him to observe a mitral valve repair. Marcus watched, transfixed, as she worked with instruments smaller than pencils to fix a mechanism more delicate than the finest Swiss watch. When the procedure was over and the patient's heart resumed its steady rhythm, Marcus knew he had found his life's work. Residency had been brutal. 100-hour weeks, decisions that carried life and death consequences. Attending physicians who seemed to view sleep deprivation as a character-building exercise. But Marcus had persevered, driven by the knowledge that every sleepless night brought him closer to the moment when he could hold a human heart in his hands and make it whole again. His fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery at Johns Hopkins had refined his skills to surgical precision. Under the mentorship of Dr. Robert Chun, one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the country, Marcus learned not just the technical aspects of surgery, but the art of remaining calm under pressure, of making split-second decisions with incomplete information, of carrying the weight of responsibility that came with holding someone's life in your hands. After completing his training, Marcus had several offers from prestigious hospitals in major cities. He chose Riverside Medical Center in Portland for reasons that went beyond prestige or salary. The hospital served a diverse community, and Marcus wanted to practice medicine where it could make the greatest difference. He wanted to be the surgeon he had needed to see when he was a young boy, wondering if someone who looked like him could master the most demanding specialty in medicine. For 3 years, Marcus had built a reputation as one of the finest cardiac surgeons on the West Coast. His patient outcomes were exceptional, his surgical technique flawless, his bedside manner warm but professional. Colleagues sought his opinions on complex cases. Residents competed for the chance to scrub in with him. Medical students hung on his every word during teaching rounds. The patient scheduled for today's surgery was Margaret Holloway, a 64-year-old retired librarian who had first noticed shortness of breath while climbing the stairs to her apartment. The cardiac catheterization had revealed severe blockages in 3 major coronary arteries. Without surgery, she had months to live. With a successful bypass, she could expect many more years of reading to her grandchildren and tending to her garden. Marcus had spent the previous evening reviewing Margaret's file, studying her echocardiograms and angiograms until he could visualize her heart anatomy with perfect clarity. He had called her the night before to answer her questions and reassure her family. This was not just another procedure to him. It was a promise to restore a life that had been interrupted by disease. As he finished changing into his scrubs, Marcus caught his reflection in the small mirror mounted inside his locker door. The face looking back at him was calm, focused, ready. This was who he had become through years of relentless preparation. A healer, a craftsman, a guardian of the most vital organ in the human body. The cardiac surgery department at Riverside Medical was a marvel of modern medicine. The operating suites were equipped with the latest technology, high-definition monitors that could display the smallest anatomical details, robotic assistants that could hold instruments with superhuman steadiness, heart-lung machines that could sustain life while the heart was stopped for repair. Marcus's surgical team had worked together for 2 years. Sarah Chun, the surgical technologist, could anticipate his needs before he voiced them. Dr. Amanda Foster, the anesthesiologist, had a reputation for keeping patients stable through the most complex procedures. Roberto Martinez, the perfusionist, managed the heart-lung machine with the precision of a concert pianist. They were more than colleagues. They were partners in the delicate dance of cardiac surgery, where every movement mattered and communication had to be flawless. Marcus had chosen each team member carefully, not just for their technical skills, but for their ability to remain calm under pressure and work together seamlessly. The preoperative briefing was scheduled for 6:30 a.m. in Conference Room B, a small space adjacent to the surgical suites. Marcus arrived 5 minutes early, as was his custom, and found his team already assembled around the oval table. Charts and imaging studies were spread across the surface, and a large monitor displayed Margaret Holloway's cardiac catheterization results. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. "Let's review our approach for today's triple bypass. For the next 20 minutes, they methodically discussed every aspect of the procedure. Which vessels would be harvested for grafts, how the heart-lung machine would be configured, what complications they might encounter and how they would address them. It was a ritual Marcus insisted upon before every surgery, a way of ensuring that when they entered the operating room, everyone would be thinking as one unified team. Sarah Chun raised a question about the positioning of the retractor for optimal exposure. Dr. Foster discussed the anesthesia plan and highlighted Margaret's mild kidney dysfunction, which would require careful monitoring of fluid balance. Roberto Martinez confirmed that the heart-lung machine had been tested and calibrated twice. As the briefing concluded, Marcus felt the familiar surge of anticipation that preceded every major surgery. This was the moment when months of medical school, years of residency, and countless hours of preparation converged into a single point of focus. In 90 minutes, he would make an incision in Margaret Holloway's chest and begin the intricate process of rerouting blood flow around her blocked arteries. "Any final questions?" Marcus asked, scanning the faces of his team. No one spoke. They were ready. Marcus stood and straightened his scrub cap, a simple blue cotton covering that his mother had embroidered with his initials during his residency. It was his good luck charm, though he would never admit to being superstitious. In his world, success came from preparation and skill, not from talismans or wishful thinking. "All right, team, let's go save a life." They filed out of the conference room and walked toward the surgical suites. The corridors of the cardiac wing buzzed with the controlled energy of a hospital beginning its morning routines. Nurses checked on post-operative patients, residents reviewed charts, and housekeeping staff prepared rooms for the day's procedures. Marcus felt a deep sense of belonging in this environment. This was his domain, the place where his years of training and natural abilities came together to serve the highest possible purpose. In a few hours, Margaret Holloway would wake up with a repaired heart and a restored future. Her family would cry tears of relief instead of grief. Her grandchildren would have more time to learn from her wisdom and kindness. As they approached the doors to the operating suite, Marcus paused for a moment to center himself. Behind those doors waited the most sophisticated surgical theater in the Pacific Northwest, a space where miracles happen through the application of knowledge, skill, and unwavering determination. He had performed this exact procedure dozens of times. His hands knew every movement, every suture, every delicate manipulation required to replace damaged vessels with healthy grafts. His team trusted him completely, and he trusted them. Margaret Holloway's family had placed their faith in his abilities, and he would not disappoint them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. Marcus Bennett pushed through the doors to the operating suite, ready to begin another day of doing what he had been born to do: heal hearts and save lives. He had no way of knowing that in exactly 43 minutes, everything he had worked for would be called into question by someone who had never held a scalpel, never felt the weight of responsibility for a human life, never understood that true belonging was earned through competence and compassion, not granted by the color of one's skin. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune overhead. The monitors displayed their endless streams of data. And somewhere in the distance, Margaret Holloway was being prepared for the surgery that would give her many more years to love and be loved. Marcus Bennett was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do. For now, that was enough. Dr. Marcus Bennett approached the scrub sink with the methodical precision that had become second nature over 15 years of surgical practice. The automatic sensor activated the water flow as his hands moved through the ritual that transformed him from doctor to surgeon: soap, scrub, rinse, repeat. Each finger individually cleaned, nails meticulously examined, forearms methodically washed to the elbows. Behind him, Sarah Chun was already setting up the surgical instruments and operating room 3. The heart-lung machine hummed quietly in the corner, its complex array of tubes and monitors ready to take over the function of Margaret Holloway's heart and lungs during the critical moments when her own circulation would be stopped. Marcus dried his hands with a sterile towel and backed through the door into the operating room, arms raised, water dripping from his elbows. The familiar environment embraced him like a second home. Every surface gleamed under the powerful surgical lights. The monitors displayed their steady streams of data. The air itself felt different here, charged with the potential for transformation. "Good morning, Dr. Bennett," Sarah said, helping him into his surgical gown. The fabric settled over his scrubs like armor, sterile and protective. She handed him his gloves, and he worked his fingers into the latex with practiced efficiency. Margaret Holloway lay on the operating table, already unconscious from the anesthesia. Dr. Amanda Foster stood at the head of the table, monitoring the ventilator and the cascading numbers on her screens. Her presence was reassuring. Marcus had worked with Amanda on dozens of cases, and her steady competence had helped him navigate some of the most challenging surgeries of his career. "The patient is stable," Amanda reported. "Blood pressure 120/80, heart rate 72, oxygen saturation 100%. Marcus nodded, his eyes scanning the surgical field. Margaret's chest had been cleaned with antiseptic solution, the skin painted with the amber-colored betadine that would help prevent infection. Sterile drapes covered everything except the area where he would make his incision. In a few moments, he would cut through skin and muscle and bone to reach the heart that needed his help. Roberto Martinez completed his final checks on the heart-lung machine. The device was a marvel of biomedical engineering, capable of oxygenating blood and pumping it through the body while the heart was stopped for surgery. Roberto had been running these machines for 8 years, and his expertise was crucial to the success of every cardiac procedure. "Perfusion circuit tested and ready," Roberto announced. "Prime volume calculated for patient weight. We're good to go." Marcus stepped up to the table and looked down at Margaret Holloway's peaceful face. In 3 hours, if everything went according to plan, she would wake up with a repaired heart and decades of additional life ahead of her. The thought filled him with the same sense of purpose that had driven him through medical school, residency, and fellowship. "Scalpel," he said. Sarah placed the handle in his palm with the confident motion of someone who had done this thousands of times. The weight felt perfect, balanced, an extension of his own hand. Marcus had often marveled at how something so small could carry such enormous responsibility. He was about to make the first incision when the door to the operating room burst open. Dr. Richard Whitman, the chief of surgery, strode into the sterile field without bothering to scrub in. His street clothes and lack of surgical attire immediately contaminated the environment that Marcus and his team had spent the last hour preparing. Behind him came 2 security guards, their black uniforms and utility belts completely out of place in the sacred space of the operating room. "Stop," Whitman commanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. "Step away from the patient." Marcus froze, the scalpel still in his hand, his mind struggling to process what was happening. In 15 years of surgery, he had never experienced anything like this. Operating rooms were sanctuaries, protected spaces where interruptions simply did not occur unless there was a life-threatening emergency. "Dr. Whitman," Marcus said carefully, "we're about to begin a scheduled procedure. Mrs. Holloway has been under anesthesia for 20 minutes. We need to proceed." "I said step away," Whitman repeated, moving closer to the table. His face was flushed with what looked like anger, though Marcus couldn't understand why. "There's been a complaint filed regarding your credentials. Until this matter is resolved, you're suspended from surgical privileges." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Around the table, his surgical team stood frozen in disbelief. Sarah Chun's eyes were wide behind her surgical mask. Dr. Foster looked back and forth between Marcus and Whitman, as if she were watching an incomprehensible foreign film. Roberto Martinez had stopped all movement, his hands hovering over the heart-lung machine controls. "What complaint?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. "My credentials are on file. I've been practicing here for 3 years without incident." Whitman's expression hardened. "That's not your concern right now. Security will escort you from the building while we conduct an investigation. Dr. Patterson will take over this case." Marcus felt the room spinning. Around him, Dr. Patterson was a competent surgeon, but he specialized in general surgery, not cardiac procedures. Margaret Holloway needed a cardiovascular specialist, someone who understood the intricate anatomy of coronary arteries and the complex physiology of heart-lung bypass. "Dr. Whitman," Marcus said, fighting to keep his voice professional, "with all due respect, Dr. Patterson isn't qualified to perform this procedure. Mrs. Holloway has severe 3-vessel disease. She needs a cardiac specialist." "Are you questioning my judgment?" Whitman snapped. "I've been chief of surgery at this hospital for 12 years. I think I know how to assign cases." The security guards stepped forward, their hands resting on their radios. One of them, a tall man with graying hair, looked uncomfortable with the situation. The other, younger and more aggressive, seemed eager to assert his authority. "Sir," the older guard said to Marcus, "we need you to come with us." Marcus looked around the operating room at the faces of his colleagues. Sarah Chun was shaking her head in disbelief. Dr. Foster had tears in her eyes behind her protective glasses. Roberto Martinez stood motionless, like a statue carved from confusion and shock. "This is insane," Sarah whispered, barely audible through her mask. "Dr. Bennett is the best cardiac surgeon in the hospital." "That's enough," Whitman barked. "Everyone out except Dr. Patterson's team. This surgery is postponed until we can get the appropriate personnel in here." Marcus set the scalpel down on the instrument tray with infinite care. His hands were perfectly steady, but his mind was reeling. 15 years of flawless practice, 3 years of exceptional service at Riverside Medical, dozens of successful surgeries, and suddenly his credentials were in question. The logic made no sense. "What about Mrs. Holloway?" Marcus asked. "She's been under anesthesia for nearly 30 minutes. Prolonging the procedure increases her risk of complications." "That's not your concern anymore," Whitman replied coldly. "Security, please escort Dr. Bennett from the building. He's not to return until this investigation is complete." The younger security guard stepped forward and reached for Marcus's arm. Marcus pulled back instinctively, not from fear, but from the sheer absurdity of being treated like a criminal in the place where he had saved hundreds of lives. "I can walk myself out," Marcus said, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. "But I want to see this complaint you're referring to. I have a right to know what I'm being accused of." Whitman's jaw tightened. "You'll be notified through proper channels. Right now you need to leave." Marcus began removing his surgical gown, each movement deliberate and controlled. He had been raised to maintain his composure under pressure, to never give adversaries the satisfaction of seeing him break. But inside, his mind was racing through possibilities, searching for any explanation that could make sense of this nightmare. As he peeled off his gloves and dropped them in the medical waste container, Marcus caught the eye of Dr. Foster. She was shaking her head almost imperceptibly, a gesture of support and disbelief. Sarah Chun was staring at the floor, her shoulders tense with barely contained anger. "This is wrong," Roberto Martinez said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Dr. Bennett has never had a complication. His patient outcomes are better than anyone in this department." "Mr. Martinez," Whitman said, his tone threatening, "if you want to keep your job, I suggest you focus on your own responsibilities." Roberto fell silent, but the anger in his eyes was unmistakable. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude toward his colleague, even as he recognized that Roberto was putting his own career at risk by speaking up. The walk from the operating room to the hospital exit felt endless. Marcus moved through the corridors he had navigated thousands of times, past the nurses' stations where he had consulted on complex cases, past the conference rooms where he had taught medical students, past the call rooms where he had caught brief naps between emergency surgeries. Other staff members stopped their conversations as he passed. Word was already spreading through the hospital's informal communication network. Dr. Bennett had been escorted out of surgery by security. No one knew why, but everyone was talking about it. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a cardiothoracic surgeon who had been Marcus's closest colleague, approached as he neared the main exit. Her face was pale with shock and confusion. "Marcus, what's happening?" she asked, falling into step beside him despite the presence of the security guards. "I heard you were pulled out of the Holloway case." "I don't know, Jen," Marcus replied, his voice carefully controlled. "Apparently there's some question about my credentials, though no one will tell me what that means." Jennifer's expression shifted from confusion to outrage. "That's ridiculous. You're board certified in cardiothoracic surgery. You have an impeccable record. This doesn't make any sense." The younger security guard interrupted. "Ma'am, we need to keep moving." Jennifer shot him a withering look, but stepped back. "Marcus, call me as soon as you can. We'll figure this out." The automatic doors of the main entrance slid open, and Marcus found himself standing on the sidewalk outside Riverside Medical Center. The morning air felt shockingly cold after the controlled environment of the hospital. Cars moved through the parking lot, their occupants unaware that inside the building, a respected surgeon had just been escorted out like a criminal. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed his attorney, David Kellerman, a man who specialized in employment law and medical malpractice. They had met at a medical conference 2 years earlier and had become friends over their shared interest in running marathons. "David, it's Marcus Bennett. I need your help. Something's happened at the hospital." Kellerman's voice was immediately alert. "What kind of something?" "I was pulled out of surgery this morning. The chief of surgery claims there's a complaint about my credentials, but he won't tell me what it is. I've been suspended and escorted from the building." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Marcus, that's highly irregular. Credential challenges require due process. They can't just suspend you without providing specifics." "Where are you now?" "Standing in the parking lot like a common criminal. Don't say anything to anyone else. Don't sign anything. I'm coming to your office right now. We need to get to the bottom of this immediately." Marcus ended the call and looked back at the hospital building. Somewhere inside, Margaret Holloway was still under anesthesia, waiting for a surgery that might now be delayed for hours. Her family was probably sitting in the waiting room, expecting to hear good news in a few hours. Instead, they would be told that there had been complications, delays, problems that no one could adequately explain. The injustice of it burned in his chest. Not just for himself, but for his patient, for his surgical team, for the principle that competence and character should matter more than anything else in a hospital setting. A young resident named Dr. Kevin Park approached hesitantly from the hospital entrance. Marcus had mentored Kevin during his surgical rotation, teaching him the fundamentals of cardiac anatomy and surgical technique. "Dr. Bennett," Kevin said, his voice uncertain, "I heard what happened. Is there anything I can do?" Marcus looked at the young doctor's earnest face and felt a mixture of appreciation and concern. "Kevin, stay out of this. Don't let it affect your career. Just focus on taking care of patients." "But this isn't right," Kevin protested. "Everyone knows you're an excellent surgeon. There has to be some mistake." "Maybe," Marcus said, though. He was beginning to suspect that what had happened was no mistake at all. "But right now, I need to figure out what I'm dealing with." As Kevin reluctantly returned to the hospital, Marcus walked to his car, a silver BMW sedan that he had purchased after his first successful year at Riverside Medical. The vehicle had represented achievement, stability, the rewards of years of hard work and dedication. Now it felt like nothing more than transportation away from a career that had suddenly been called into question. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring at the hospital building through the windshield. Somewhere in there, Dr. Patterson was probably scrambling to prepare for a surgery he wasn't qualified to perform. Margaret Holloway's life hung in the balance while politics and prejudice played out in the sterile corridors of a place that was supposed to be dedicated to healing. Marcus started the engine and drove toward his law office meeting, his mind already beginning to formulate the questions that needed answers. Who had filed the complaint? What specific accusations had been made? Why had he been denied the right to see the evidence against him? But underneath all the procedural questions lay a deeper, more troubling possibility. In 15 years of practice, Marcus had never been questioned about his credentials, never been subjected to the kind of scrutiny that had just erupted without warning. The timing seemed suspicious, the process irregular, the accusations vague. As he navigated the Portland traffic, Dr. Marcus Bennett began to consider the possibility that his expertise had never been the real issue at all. David Kellerman's law office occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower in downtown Portland, with windows that offered a panoramic view of the Willamette River. Marcus had been there twice before for social occasions, but walking through the mahogany-paneled reception area felt different now. This wasn't a friendly visit between running partners. This was an emergency consultation that could determine the future of his career. Kellerman emerged from his office before the receptionist could announce Marcus's arrival. Tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and sharp blue eyes, he moved with the focused energy of someone who specialized in fighting institutional injustice. His handshake was firm, his expression grim. "Marcus, come in. We need to talk immediately." The office was tastefully decorated with law books, diplomas, and photographs from various marathons they had both completed. Under normal circumstances, Marcus would have felt relaxed here. Today, he felt like a man drowning in circumstances beyond his control. "Tell me exactly what happened," Kellerman said, settling behind his desk with a legal pad and pen. "Don't leave out any details, no matter how insignificant they might seem." Marcus recounted the morning's events with surgical precision, starting with his normal routine and ending with his forced departure from the hospital. Kellerman took notes, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. His expression grew darker as the story unfolded. "This is highly irregular," Kellerman said when Marcus finished. "Hospital administrators can't just suspend privileges without due process. There are protocols, review boards, formal procedures that must be followed. What they did to you this morning violates multiple employment laws. So what's our next step?" Marcus asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Legal battles were expensive, time-consuming, and often brutal for the people who initiated them. "First, we demand immediate access to the complaint that was filed against you. They can't suspend you based on secret accusations. Second, we request an emergency hearing with the hospital's medical board. Third, we document everything that happened today while the details are fresh." Kellerman's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "That's interesting. It's Jennifer Walsh from Riverside Medical. Do you mind if I take this?" Marcus nodded, curious about why his colleague would be calling his attorney. Kellerman answered on speakerphone. "David, it's Jennifer Walsh. Is Marcus with you? I have information he needs to hear immediately." "He's right here, Jennifer. What's going on?" Jennifer's voice was tight with anger and urgency. "I've been making inquiries since Marcus was escorted out this morning. The complaint against his credentials came from Dr. Harrison Mills, the new hospital administrator who started 3 weeks ago. But here's the interesting part. Mills filed the complaint yesterday afternoon, less than 24 hours before Marcus's scheduled surgery." Marcus felt his stomach clench. Dr. Harrison Mills was new to Riverside Medical, having been hired from a hospital system in Texas. Marcus had met him only briefly during a mandatory staff meeting, but something about the man had seemed off. Mills had spoken extensively about efficiency improvements and cost management strategies while saying very little about patient care. What specific accusations did Mills make? Kellerman asked, his pen poised over the legal pad. That's where it gets murky, Jennifer replied. I spoke to Dr. Patricia Hayes in the medical staff office. She said the complaint alleges irregularities in Marcus's surgical outcomes, but when I pressed for details, she couldn't provide any. She also mentioned that Mills specifically requested an immediate suspension rather than the standard review process. Marcus and Kellerman exchanged glances. In medical administrative procedures, immediate suspensions were reserved for cases involving imminent danger to patients or gross misconduct. Neither applied to Marcus's situation. Jennifer, this is crucial, Kellerman said. Can you get us a copy of the actual complaint? I'm working on it. Dr. Hayes is sympathetic, but she's scared of Mills. Apparently, he's been making personnel changes throughout the hospital since he arrived. Several longtime employees have been terminated for what he calls performance issues. After Jennifer ended the call, Marcus sat in silence, processing the implications of what they had learned. Dr. Harrison Mills, a man who barely knew him, had filed a complaint challenging credentials that had never been questioned in 15 years of practice. The timing was suspicious, the process irregular, and the accusations vague. David, Marcus said slowly, I think this has nothing to do with my medical credentials. Kellerman nodded grimly. I'm starting to think you're right. Tell me about Mills. What do you know about him? Marcus searched his memory for details about the new administrator. He came from Houston Methodist Hospital, where he was apparently successful in reducing operational costs. During his introduction meeting, he talked about implementing strategic efficiency measures and optimizing staffing configurations. He seemed particularly interested in the cardiac surgery department, asking detailed questions about case volumes and revenue generation. Did he single you out for any specific attention? Not directly, but ... Marcus paused, remembering the conversation that had seemed insignificant at the time. During the staff meeting, he made a comment about ensuring that all physicians met the highest standards of institutional compatibility. I thought it was typical administrative jargon, but now I'm wondering if there was a deeper meaning. Kellerman made more notes, his expression increasingly concerned. Marcus, I need to ask you some difficult questions. Have you had any conflicts with other physicians? Any patient complaints? Any incidents that might have given Mills ammunition to use against you? None, Marcus replied without hesitation. My patient satisfaction scores are consistently in the top 5%. I've never had a malpractice claim. The only conflicts I've had were minor disagreements about surgical techniques, and those were resolved through normal medical discourse. What about your relationship with hospital administration? Any budget disputes, policy disagreements, anything that might have put you on Mills's radar? Marcus thought carefully before answering. 3 months ago, I opposed the administration's proposal to reduce nursing staff and the cardiac IQ. I argued that patient safety required maintaining current staffing levels, especially given our complex caseload. The proposal was ultimately rejected by the medical board, but I was vocal in my opposition. Who else opposed the staffing cuts? Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Dr. Foster from anesthesiology, and several of the senior nurses. But I was probably the most outspoken critic. Kellerman's pen moved rapidly across the legal pad. This is starting to form a pattern. Mills wants to reduce costs and increase efficiency. You're a highly paid specialist who advocates for patient care over financial considerations. From his perspective, you might represent an obstacle to his agenda. The intercom on Kellerman's desk buzzed, and his secretary's voice came through the speaker. Mr. Kellerman, There's a Dr. Patricia Hayes on line 2. She says it's urgent regarding the Bennett matter. Kellerman answered immediately. Dr. Hayes, thank you for calling back. Do you have information about the complaint? I can't discuss specifics over the phone, Dr. Hayes replied, her voice strained. But I can tell you that Dr. Mills is demanding an expedited review process that bypasses the normal peer evaluation. He wants the medical board to make a decision within 48 hours based solely on his administrative assessment. Marcus felt anger building in his chest. Peer review was a fundamental protection for physicians, ensuring that medical decisions were evaluated by other doctors who understood the complexities of clinical practice. Administrative review alone was inadequate and potentially dangerous. Dr. Hayes, Kellerman interjected, that's highly irregular. Medical credentials require peer evaluation by board-certified physicians in the same specialty. An administrator can't unilaterally determine medical competency. I know, Dr. Hayes replied. I've tried to explain the proper procedures to Dr. Mills, but he's insisting on administrative expedience. He claims that patient safety requires immediate action. What's the medical board's position? Marcus asked. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison is convening an emergency session for tomorrow morning. She's not happy about the irregular process, but Mills is pressuring her to move quickly. The problem is that most of the board members don't know you personally, and Mills is presenting his case as a patient safety issue. After the call ended, Kellerman leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Marcus, I think we're dealing with something more systematic than a simple credential challenge. Mills appears to be using administrative pressure to bypass normal medical procedures. The question is why. Maybe Jennifer was right about the personnel changes, Marcus said. If Mills is systematically removing physicians who oppose his cost-cutting measures, I might not be the only target. Kellerman nodded. We need to investigate that possibility. Who else at the hospital might be facing similar pressure? Marcus thought about his colleagues, trying to identify patterns in Mills's behavior. Dr. Foster mentioned that several physicians had been called into meetings with Mills recently. She said they came out looking worried, but wouldn't discuss what was said. We need to talk to them. Quietly, carefully, but we need to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. The phone rang again. This time it was Roberto Martinez, the perfusionist who had been part of Marcus's surgical team that morning. Dr. Bennett, Roberto said, his voice hushed. I can't talk long, but I wanted you to know what happened after you left. Dr. Patterson tried to perform Mrs. Holloway's surgery, but he wasn't prepared for the complexity of her case. When they encountered complications with the graft anastomosis, they had to abort the procedure and close her chest without completing the bypass. Marcus felt his heart sink. Margaret Holloway, the retired librarian who had trusted him with her life, was now in a worse position than when she had started. An incomplete surgery meant additional trauma, increased infection risk, and the need for another operation. Is she stable? Marcus asked. For now, but Dr. Foster is concerned about her condition. The prolonged anesthesia time and surgical trauma have compromised her kidney function. She's going to need another surgery within the next few days, or her prognosis will deteriorate rapidly. Who's going to perform the revision surgery? That's the problem, Roberto replied. Dr. Patterson knows he's not qualified for the case. Dr. Walsh is available, but Mills is refusing to approve her as the primary surgeon. He's insisting on bringing in an outside specialist, which could take several days to arrange. Marcus closed, his eyes feeling the weight of responsibility for a patient he couldn't help. Margaret Holloway was suffering because of administrative interference in medical decisions. Her life was at risk because politics had invaded the operating room. Roberto, thank you for calling. Please keep me informed about Mrs. Holloway's condition. Dr. Bennett, there's something else. Several of us have been talking, and we think what happened to you this morning was wrong. We're prepared to speak up if it comes to that." After Roberto's call, Marcus sat quietly, processing the full implications of the situation. This wasn't just about his career anymore. It was about patient care, medical ethics, and the fundamental question of who should make decisions in a hospital setting. "David," he said finally, "I want to fight this. Not just for myself, but for my patients and my colleagues. If Mills can do this to me, he can do it to anyone who stands in his way." Kellerman smiled grimly. "That's what I was hoping you'd say. Because based on what we've learned today, this case is about much more than medical credentials. It's about the soul of healthcare itself." As evening fell over Portland, Marcus Bennett prepared for a battle he had never imagined fighting. Somewhere across the city, Margaret Holloway lay in the cardiac ICU, her surgery incomplete, her future uncertain. And in the administrative offices of Riverside Medical Center, Dr. Harrison Mills was probably congratulating himself on successfully removing an obstacle to his efficiency agenda. But Mills had made a crucial miscalculation. He had underestimated the determination of a surgeon who had spent his entire career fighting for his patients. The man who could remain calm while repairing a human heart would not be intimidated by administrative bullying. The real surgery was about to begin. Dr. Marcus Bennett arrived at his downtown Portland apartment as darkness settled over the city. The penthouse unit, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and view of Mount Hood, had always been his sanctuary after long days in the operating room. Tonight, it felt more like a war room where he would plan his counterattack against institutional injustice. His phone had been buzzing constantly since leaving Kellerman's office. Colleagues, residents he had mentored, even nurses from other departments were reaching out with messages of support and disbelief. The news of his suspension had spread through the hospital's informal network faster than any official announcement could travel. Marcus poured himself a glass of water and stood at the window, looking down at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Margaret Holloway was fighting for her life because administrative interference had prevented her from receiving the care she needed. The thought fueled his determination to fight back systematically and strategically. His phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Dr. Bennett, this is Dr. Catherine Armstrong from Seattle Children's Hospital. I hope you don't mind me calling you directly." Marcus was surprised. Dr. Armstrong was one of the most respected pediatric cardiac surgeons on the West Coast, and they had met only briefly at medical conferences. "Dr. Armstrong, what can I do for you?" "I called because what happened to you today is already making waves in the medical community." Dr. Jennifer Walsh reached out to several colleagues and were concerned about the implications for all of us. If hospital administrators can arbitrarily suspend surgeons without due process, it sets a dangerous precedent. Marcus felt a surge of hope. He had expected to fight this battle alone, but it seemed that his colleagues understood the broader implications of Mills's actions. "Dr. Armstrong, I appreciate your concern. Right now, I'm trying to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. That's why I'm calling. 3 months ago, Dr. Harrison Mills tried to recruit me for a position at Riverside Medical. During our conversation, he made some comments that didn't sit well with me. He spoke about optimizing physician demographics and ensuring cultural alignment with hospital objectives. At the time, I thought it was just corporate jargon, but now I'm wondering if there was a deeper meaning." Marcus gripped the phone tighter. "What exactly did he say?" "He mentioned that modern healthcare required strategic personnel management and that some physicians were too independently minded for efficient hospital operations. He specifically said that Riverside needed surgeons who understood that medical decisions should align with administrative priorities." The implications were chilling. Mills wasn't just cutting costs. He was trying to reshape the medical staff, to eliminate physicians who might challenge his authority or advocate too strongly for patient care over profit margins. "Dr. Armstrong, would you be willing to document that conversation?" Absolutely. And Dr. Bennett, you should know that several of us are prepared to support you publicly if necessary. The medical community can't allow administrators to intimidate physicians into silence. After ending the call, Marcus began making a list of allies and resources. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was his strongest supporter within Riverside Medical. David Kellerman provided legal expertise. Dr. Armstrong represented potential support from the broader medical community. But he needed more information about Mills's pattern of behavior and his ultimate objectives. The next call came from an unexpected source, Dr. Michael Torres, a general surgeon who had been at Riverside Medical for 8 years. Marcus knew Torres primarily by reputation competent, but not particularly outspoken about hospital politics. Marcus, I heard about what happened today. I wanted to reach out because I think I might have information you need. What kind of information? Mills called me into his office last week for what he described as a performance optimization discussion. He had charts showing my surgical times, length of stay statistics, and complication rates. Everything was well within normal parameters. But he kept emphasizing the need for efficiency improvements and cost-conscious decision-making. Marcus recognized the pattern. Mills was using administrative pressure to influence medical practice, subtly coercing physicians to prioritize financial considerations over patient care. Did he make any specific demands? He suggested that I consider shorter surgical times and earlier discharge protocols. When I explained that my current practices were based on patient safety considerations, he said that Riverside needed surgeons who could adapt to evolving healthcare economics. The whole conversation felt like a threat disguised as guidance. Have you heard of him having similar conversations with other physicians? Dr. Lisa Chun from Internal Medicine mentioned a meeting where Mills questioned her diagnostic ordering patterns. Dr. Robert Kim from Orthopedics was told that his surgical case selection was not optimally aligned with hospital revenue objectives. It seems like he's systematically pressuring physicians across multiple departments. Marcus thanked Torres and added his name to the growing list of colleagues who might be facing similar pressure. The pattern was becoming clear. Mills was using administrative authority to reshape medical practice according to financial rather than clinical criteria. His laptop chimed with an incoming email from Jennifer Walsh. The subject line read, "Urgent. Internal documents." Marcus, the email began, "I've obtained copies of internal memos that Mills has been circulating to department heads. You need to see these immediately. I'm sending them through encrypted email to protect my source." The attached documents revealed the scope of Mills's agenda. One memo, titled Strategic Workforce Optimization, outlined plans to restructure physician staffing to align with operational efficiency goals. Another document, labeled Cost Reduction Initiative, Phase 1, specifically mentioned the cardiac surgery department as over-resourced relative to revenue generation. Most damning was a memo dated just 1 week before Marcus's suspension. It was addressed to the hospital's board of directors and outlined what Mills called personnel adjustments to optimize departmental productivity. The document identified several physicians by name, describing them as high-maintenance providers whose practice patterns impede efficiency improvements. Marcus's name was prominently featured, with a notation that read, "Dr. Bennett, Cardiac Surgery. Excessive advocacy for resource-intensive patient care protocols. Resistant to administrative guidance. Recommend immediate review of credentials and practice patterns." The memo revealed Mills's true motivation. This wasn't about medical competency or patient safety. It was about removing physicians who prioritized patient care over profit margins. Marcus was being targeted because he had opposed staffing cuts and advocated for maintaining high standards of care regardless of cost. David Kellerman arrived at Marcus's apartment 30 minutes later, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents and wearing the focused expression of a lawyer preparing for battle. "Marcus, I've been researching Mills's background, and what I found is disturbing. At his previous hospital in Houston, 3 physicians filed discrimination complaints against him. The cases were settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements, but I was able to confirm that the plaintiffs were all minority physicians who had been vocal advocates for patient care. So this is a pattern for him. It appears so. Mills seems to target physicians who won't be intimidated into compromising their medical judgment. The fact that you're African American and outspoken about patient care makes you a particularly attractive target. Kellerman spread the internal memos across Marcus's dining table, analyzing them with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. These documents are smoking guns, Marcus. They prove that Mills has been planning your removal for weeks, and that his motivations have nothing to do with medical competency. This is employment discrimination disguised as administrative oversight. What's our strategy? Multi-pronged attack. First, we demand an immediate injunction to restore your surgical privileges pending a proper review. Second, we file formal complaints with the State Medical Board and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Third, we prepare a civil rights lawsuit that exposes Mills's pattern of discriminatory behavior. Marcus nodded, feeling energized by the prospect of fighting back systematically. What about Margaret Holloway? She needs surgery within the next few days, or her condition will deteriorate. That's our strongest immediate argument. We can demonstrate that Mills's actions are directly endangering patient care. No judge will allow administrative politics to override medical necessity. As they worked through the legal strategy, Marcus's phone rang again. This time the caller was Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the chief of the medical board, who would be presiding over tomorrow's emergency session. Dr. Bennett, I'm calling to inform you that tomorrow's hearing has been postponed indefinitely. Dr. Mills has requested additional time to compile what he calls comprehensive evidence regarding your case. Marcus felt anger surge through him. Mills was buying time, probably hoping that delay would discourage resistance and allow him to strengthen his position. Dr. Morrison, with respect, postponing this hearing endangers patient care. I have a patient who needs immediate surgical intervention, and I'm the most qualified surgeon available. I understand your concern, Dr. Bennett, but Dr. Mills has raised serious questions about hospital liability if we proceed without a thorough investigation. What specific questions? I have a right to know the accusations against me. Dr. Morrison hesitated. I'm not at liberty to discuss details, but I can tell you that Dr. Mills has compiled what he describes as evidence of pattern irregularities in your surgical practice. After the call ended, Kellerman's expression was grim. Mills is playing for time while he manufactures evidence to support his case. We need to act aggressively to prevent him from controlling the narrative. What do you recommend? Emergency filing with the Federal District Court. We request an immediate restraining order preventing Mills from interfering with your medical practice, pending a full investigation. We also demand discovery of all documents related to his decision-making process. Marcus spent the rest of the evening reviewing his surgical records from the past 3 years, documenting his exceptional patient outcomes and flawless safety record. Every case had been successful, every decision defensible, every outcome optimal given the clinical circumstances. As midnight approached, he received one final call. This time it was Roberto Martinez calling from the hospital. Dr. Bennett, I thought you should know that Mrs. Holloway's condition has deteriorated. Her kidney function is declining, and Dr. Foster is concerned about cardiac complications from the incomplete surgery. Dr. Walsh wants to take her back to surgery tomorrow, but Mills is blocking the authorization. Marcus felt the full weight of injustice settle on his shoulders. Margaret Holloway was suffering because administrative interference had prevented her from receiving appropriate care. Her life was at risk because a hospital administrator valued cost control over medical necessity. Roberto, document everything. Every conversation, every decision, every delay. Mrs. Holloway's case is going to be central to exposing what Mills is really doing. Dr. Bennett, there's something else. Word is spreading among the nursing staff about what happened to you. Some of them are talking about filing formal complaints about administrative interference in patient care. Mills may have more opposition than he realizes. As Marcus prepared for bed, he reflected on the events of the past 18 hours. What had started as a routine surgical case had evolved into a battle for the soul of medical practice. Mills had chosen the wrong target. Instead of intimidating a lone physician into silence, he had awakened a network of colleagues who understood that the principles of medical care were worth fighting for. Tomorrow would bring the first major confrontation in what promised to be a lengthy battle. But Marcus Bennett was no longer fighting alone. He had allies, evidence, and most importantly, the certainty that his cause was just. Somewhere across the city, Margaret Holloway lay in the cardiac ICU, her incomplete surgery, a symbol of what happened when politics invaded medicine. Her recovery depended not just on surgical skill, but on whether the medical community would stand up to administrative tyranny. The real operation was about to begin. And this time, Marcus Bennett would be operating on the system itself. The federal courthouse in downtown Portland stood like a monument to justice, its granite columns an imposing facade designed to inspire confidence in the rule of law. At 8:30 a.m. on Thursday morning, Dr. Marcus Bennett climbed the steps alongside his attorney David Kellerman, carrying a briefcase full of evidence that would either restore his career or expose the corruption festering within Riverside Medical Center. Judge Patricia Hoffman had agreed to hear their emergency motion for a temporary restraining order after Kellerman had filed a comprehensive complaint documenting Mills's pattern of discriminatory behavior. The courtroom was packed with an unusual assembly of observers, medical colleagues who had taken time away from patient care to witness the proceeding, journalists who had caught wind of the story, and hospital administrators who understood that the outcome would set a precedent for medical institutions across the country. Dr. Harrison Mills sat at the defendant's table with two corporate attorneys, his expression confident despite the damning evidence that had been compiled against him. He had spent the previous evening preparing his defense, convinced that his administrative authority would shield him from legal consequences. Judge Hoffman, a small woman with silver hair and piercing brown eyes, called the court to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. Her reputation for cutting through legal maneuvering to reach the truth had made her one of the most respected federal judges in Oregon. This court will hear arguments regarding the plaintiff's motion for emergency relief. In the matter of Bennett versus Riverside Medical Center and Harrison Mills, she announced. Mr. Kellerman, you may proceed. Kellerman stood and approached the bench, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of a lawyer who knew he held winning cards. Your Honor, Dr. Marcus Bennett is one of the finest cardiac surgeons on the West Coast, with a 15-year record of flawless patient care and surgical excellence. 3 days ago, he was arbitrarily suspended from his position based on fabricated accusations that have no basis in medical reality. We are here today because a hospital administrator has weaponized the credentialing process to remove a physician who dared to prioritize patient care over profit margins. Kellerman presented the internal memos that Jennifer Walsh had obtained, projecting them on the courtroom's display screens. The documents revealed Mills's systematic plan to remove physicians who opposed his cost-cutting agenda, with Marcus specifically targeted for his advocacy of resource-intensive patient care protocols. Your Honor, these documents prove that Dr. Mills never had concerns about Dr. Bennett's medical competency. This suspension is retaliation against a physician who refused to compromise his medical judgment to satisfy administrative demands for efficiency. Judge Hoffman studied the memos carefully, her expression growing increasingly stern as she read Mills's descriptions of physicians as high-maintenance providers whose practice patterns impede efficiency improvements. Mr. Kellerman, what Specific relief are you seeking? We request an immediate restraining order requiring Riverside Medical to restore Dr. Bennett's surgical privileges pending a full investigation. We also seek emergency authorization for Dr. Bennett to perform surgery on Mrs. Margaret Holloway, whose life is in danger due to the incomplete procedure that resulted from his wrongful suspension. The mention of Margaret Holloway's condition sent a visible ripple through the courtroom. Several physicians in the gallery exchanged concerned glances, understanding the medical implications of delaying necessary cardiac surgery. Judge Hoffman turned her attention to the defense table. Mr. Crawford, how does your client respond to these allegations? John Crawford, Riverside Medical's lead attorney, stood with less confidence than he had displayed during pretrial conferences. The evidence against Mills was more comprehensive than he had anticipated, and the judge's expression suggested she was not sympathetic to administrative overreach. Your Honor, Dr. Mills is responsible for ensuring the highest standards of patient care at Riverside Medical Center. When concerns were raised about Dr. Bennett's surgical practices, he had a duty to investigate those concerns through proper administrative channels. What specific concerns? Judge Hoffman interrupted. I've reviewed the complaint filed against Dr. Bennett, and it contains no concrete allegations of medical malpractice or patient harm. It appears to be a collection of vague accusations without supporting evidence. Crawford hesitated, realizing that the foundation of Mills's case was crumbling under judicial scrutiny. Your Honor, Dr. Mills received reports of irregularities that required immediate investigation. From whom? I want names, dates, and specific incidents. The courtroom fell silent as Crawford struggled to provide answers that didn't exist. Mills leaned forward to whisper urgently in his attorney's ear, but it was clear that they had no substantive evidence to support the suspension. Judge Hoffman's patience was exhausted. Mr. Crawford, it appears that your client has suspended a highly qualified physician based on nothing more than administrative preference. That is not only legally questionable, but potentially dangerous to patient care. At that moment, the courtroom doors opened and Dr. Jennifer Walsh entered, carrying an urgent message that would change everything. She approached the plaintiff's table and handed Kellerman a sealed envelope, whispering something that made his eyes widen with alarm. Kellerman immediately stood. Your Honor, I've just received critical information regarding Mrs. Holloway's medical condition. May I present this evidence to the court? Judge Hoffman nodded, and Kellerman read from the document Jennifer had provided. Mrs. Margaret Holloway was admitted to the cardiac ICU at 3 a.m. this morning with acute kidney failure and signs of cardiac distress. Her condition has deteriorated rapidly due to complications from the incomplete surgery performed after Dr. Bennett's suspension. Dr. Walsh, the attending cardiologist, has determined that Mrs. Holloway requires immediate surgical intervention to save her life. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the implications became clear. Mills's administrative interference hadn't just damaged Marcus's career. It had created a life-threatening medical emergency for an innocent patient. Judge Hoffman's expression shifted from stern to outraged. Dr. Mills, you will approach the bench immediately. Mills rose reluctantly, his confidence replaced by visible anxiety as he faced the full weight of judicial authority. Dr. Mills, explain to this court how your administrative decisions have resulted in a patient's life being endangered. Mills straightened his tie nervously. Your Honor, medical complications are unfortunate, but they don't invalidate proper administrative procedures. I had concerns about Dr. Bennett's practices that required investigation. What concerns? Be specific. Mills's face flushed as he realized he had no adequate answer. There were reports of irregularities in his surgical approach that suggested potential risk to patient safety. From whom? I want documentation of these reports. The reports came through confidential administrative channels that Judge Hoffman cut him off sharply. Dr. Mills, this court has reviewed every document in this case. There are no reports of irregularities in Dr. Bennett's practice. What there is, however, is clear evidence that you targeted him for removal because he opposed your cost-cutting initiatives. The judge turned to address the entire courtroom, her voice carrying the full authority of federal law. This court finds that Dr. Marcus Bennett has been subjected to discriminatory employment action based on his advocacy for patient care standards. The suspension of his surgical privileges appears to be retaliation rather than legitimate administrative oversight. She returned her attention to Mills, who was now visibly sweating despite the courtroom's cool temperature. Dr. Mills, your actions have not only violated Dr. Bennett's employment rights, but have also endangered patient care. Mrs. Holloway's current medical crisis is a direct result of your interference in medical decision-making. Judge Hoffman's gavel came down with finality. This court hereby grants the plaintiff's motion for emergency relief. Riverside Medical Center is ordered to immediately restore Dr. Bennett's surgical privileges and provide him with full access to hospital facilities. Furthermore, Dr. Bennett is authorized to perform emergency surgery on Mrs. Holloway as soon as medically feasible. The courtroom exploded in applause from the medical professionals who had gathered to support Marcus. Several residents and nurses who had taken personal time to attend the hearing stood and cheered, their faces bright with vindication. But Judge Hoffman wasn't finished. She fixed Mills with a stare that could have frozen blood. Dr. Mills, this court is also ordering a comprehensive investigation into your administrative practices at Riverside Medical Center. If it is determined that you have engaged in a pattern of discriminatory behavior against physicians, you will face serious legal consequences. As the judge's words echoed through the courtroom, Mills seemed to shrink into himself. The confident administrator who had walked into court expecting legal protection for his actions was now facing the possibility of criminal charges and professional ruin. Kellerman approached the bench with one final request. Your Honor, given the urgency of Mrs. Holloway's condition, we request that the court's order be transmitted immediately to Riverside Medical Center so that Dr. Bennett can begin preparation for emergency surgery. Granted. The clerk will transmit this order immediately. As the court session concluded, Marcus felt a mixture of relief and determination. The legal victory was important, but Margaret Holloway was still fighting for her life in the cardiac ICU. Every minute of delay increased her risk of permanent cardiac damage or death. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of reporters had gathered, drawn by the story of a respected surgeon fighting institutional discrimination. Marcus paused on the courthouse steps, understanding that his words would reach far beyond Portland. This case was never just about my career, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp morning air. It was about protecting the fundamental principle that medical decisions should be based on patient care, not administrative convenience. Mrs. Holloway nearly died because politics invaded the operating room. That can never be allowed to happen again. Dr. Jennifer Walsh approached Marcus as the crowd began to disperse. Margaret is stabilized for now, but she needs surgery within the next few hours. Are you ready? Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar surge of focus that preceded every major surgery. Let's go save a life. As they drove toward Riverside Medical Center, Marcus reflected on the morning's events. The legal victory was satisfying, but the real test would come in the operating room. Margaret Holloway's survival would depend on his ability to repair the damage caused by 3 days of administrative interference. Back at the courthouse, Dr. Harrison Mills sat alone at the defendant's table, staring at the legal documents that had destroyed his career in less than 2 hours. The confident administrator who had targeted Marcus Bennett for removal was now facing federal investigation, certain termination, and possible criminal charges. His gamble had backfired spectacularly. Instead of quietly removing a troublesome physician, he had exposed himself to legal scrutiny that would end his career and potentially result in prison time. But for Marcus Bennett, the real victory was still ahead. In operating room 3, Margaret Holloway was waiting for the surgery that would save her life and vindicate everything he had fought for over the past 3 days. Justice had been served in the courtroom. Now it was time to serve it in the operating room. The automatic doors of Riverside Medical Center slid open as Dr. Marcus Bennett entered the hospital for the first time in 4 days. The familiar sounds and smells of the medical center enveloped him, but something felt fundamentally different. Word of the federal court ruling had spread through the hospital faster than any official announcement, and the atmosphere buzzed with an energy that Marcus had never experienced before. Nurses, who had worked alongside him for years, offered subtle nods of support as he passed through the corridors. Residents who had trained under his guidance stepped forward to shake his hand, their faces bright with admiration for someone who had stood up to institutional intimidation. Even housekeeping staff, who rarely interacted directly with surgeons, paused to acknowledge his return with respectful smiles. Dr. Jennifer Walsh met him at the entrance to the cardiac wing, her expression a mixture of relief and urgency. "Marcus, thank God you're back. Margaret's condition has stabilized, but we need to get her into surgery within the next 2 hours. Her kidney function is improving with dialysis, but the cardiac complications from the incomplete procedure are getting worse." As they walked toward the cardiac ICU, Jennifer briefed Marcus on the developments that had occurred during his absence. The story broke on social media about 6 hours ago. Medical professionals across the country are sharing your case and discussing their own experiences with administrative interference. The hashtag Doctors Not Administrators is trending nationally. Marcus paused outside Margaret Holloway's room, where her family had maintained a constant vigil since her emergency admission. Through the glass partition, he could see her daughter, holding her hand while her son-in-law paced nervously by the window. The sight reinforced his determination to not only save Margaret's life, but to ensure that no other patient would suffer because of administrative interference in medical care. "How is she responding to treatment?" Marcus asked, reviewing the latest lab results and cardiac monitoring data. "Better than expected, considering the trauma of the incomplete surgery. Dr. Foster has been managing her fluid balance carefully, and the nephrology team has optimized her dialysis schedule. She's as ready for surgery as she's going to be." Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar pre-surgical focus beginning to take hold. But before he could enter Margaret's room, his phone buzzed with a call from an unexpected source. Dr. Rachel Singh, the chief medical officer of Johns Hopkins Hospital, where Marcus had completed his fellowship. "Marcus, I've been following your case since yesterday. First, let me say how proud I am of you for standing up to this kind of institutional bullying. Second, I wanted you to know that we're implementing new protections here at Hopkins to prevent administrators from interfering with clinical decision-making." The conversation continued for several minutes, with Dr. Singh explaining that Marcus's case had prompted emergency meetings at major medical centers across the country. Hospital boards were reviewing their policies regarding administrative oversight of medical practice, and several institutions were implementing new safeguards to protect physicians from retaliation. "Marcus, your case has become a rallying point for the medical community. Physicians who have been quietly enduring administrative pressure are finding the courage to speak out. This is bigger than just your situation. It's a movement to protect the fundamental principles of medical practice." After ending the call, Marcus entered Margaret Holloway's room, where the family immediately stood to greet him. Margaret's daughter, Sarah, had tears in her eyes as she approached. "Dr. Bennett, we heard what happened to you because of Mom's case. I can't believe they tried to prevent you from operating because of some administrator's agenda." Marcus took Sarah's hand gently. "Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know that your mother is going to receive the best possible care. The delay was unfortunate, But we're going to correct the problems and get her heart working properly." Margaret herself was awake despite her weakened condition, her eyes focusing on Marcus with remarkable clarity. "Doctor, I heard on the news that you fought for the right to take care of me. I want you to know how grateful I am. Mrs. Holloway, you don't need to thank me. Taking care of you is exactly what I'm supposed to do." As Marcus reviewed Margaret's updated imaging studies and lab results, his phone continued to buzz with messages from colleagues across the country. Dr. Michael Chun from Stanford Medical Center reported that their administration had called an emergency meeting to review physician protection policies. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez from Mass General wrote that residents were organizing to ensure that clinical training wouldn't be compromised by administrative interference. The ripple effect was expanding beyond individual hospitals. Medical schools were incorporating discussions of administrative versus clinical authority into their curricula. Professional organizations were drafting new guidelines to protect physicians from retaliation. State medical boards were reviewing their oversight procedures to prevent abuse of the credentialing process. Dr. Amanda Foster approached Marcus as he completed his preoperative preparation. "Marcus, I need to tell you something that happened while you were suspended. Mills tried to pressure me into signing a statement questioning your surgical competence. When I refused, he threatened to review my anesthesiology privileges." The revelation didn't surprise Marcus, but it confirmed the systematic nature of Mills's intimidation campaign. "Amanda, did you document that conversation?" "Every word. And I'm not the only one. Dr. Torres from General Surgery, Dr. Kim from Orthopedics, and Dr. Chun from Internal Medicine all received similar pressure. We've all provided statements to the hospital's board of directors." As word of Mills's broader intimidation campaign spread, the scope of his misconduct became clear. He hadn't just targeted Marcus. He had systematically pressured multiple physicians to compromise their medical judgment in service of his efficiency agenda. The pattern revealed a level of institutional corruption that went far beyond a single discriminatory incident. The preoperative briefing for Margaret's surgery took place in the same conference room where Marcus had planned dozens of procedures over the past 3 years. But today felt different. His surgical team gathered around the table with an energy and determination that reflected their understanding of the broader significance of this procedure. Sarah Chun, the surgical technologist, spoke first. "Dr. Bennett, I want you to know that the entire OR staff supported you throughout this ordeal. What Mills tried to do was wrong, and we're honored to be working with you again." Roberto Martinez, the perfusionist, nodded emphatically. "The heart-lung machine is ready, and I've double-checked every circuit. Mrs. Holloway is going to get the best perfusion support I've ever provided." Dr. Foster added her own thoughts. "Marcus, this surgery represents more than just medical care. It's a statement that clinical excellence can't be compromised by administrative interference." As they reviewed the surgical plan for Margaret's cardiac repair, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility that went beyond a single patient. The success of this procedure would validate not only his own competence, but the principle that medical decisions should be made by physicians, not administrators. During the briefing, Marcus's phone rang with a call from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Hayes from the medical staff office, the same administrator who had been reluctant to provide information about Mills's complaint. "Dr. Bennett, I wanted to call personally to apologize for my role in this situation. I should have questioned Mills's irregular procedures instead of simply following his directives. I've submitted my resignation to the board of directors, effective immediately." The conversation revealed another dimension of the institutional change taking place at Riverside Medical. Administrators who had enabled Mills's behavior were facing consequences for their complicity, while those who had opposed him were being recognized for their integrity. Marcus thanked Dr. Hayes for her honesty and candor, understanding that institutional change required accountability at all levels. The corruption that had enabled Mills's behavior needed to be systematically addressed to prevent future abuse. As the surgical team prepared to move to the operating room, Marcus received one final call that would shape his understanding of the national impact of his case. Dr. Helen Washington, the president of the American College of Surgeons, was on the line. "Dr. Bennett, I'm calling to inform you that the college is establishing a new committee on physician protection, and we'd like you to chair it. Your case has highlighted vulnerabilities in the medical system that need to be systematically addressed." The offer was both an honor and a responsibility. Marcus would have the opportunity to shape national policies that protected physicians from administrative retaliation, while ensuring that patient care remained the primary focus of medical practice. "Dr. Washington, I'm honored by the offer. Let me get through this surgery, and then we can discuss how to build the protections that the medical community needs." As Marcus walked toward operating room 3, he reflected on the transformation that had occurred over the past 4 days. What had started as a personal attack on his career had evolved into a national movement to protect the integrity of medical practice. The support from colleagues across the country demonstrated that the medical community would not tolerate administrative interference in clinical care. The fluorescent lights of the operating room hummed with their familiar energy as Marcus entered this sterile environment. Margaret Holloway was already positioned on the table, her chest prepared for the procedure that would repair the damage caused by administrative interference in her care. But this surgery represented more than just cardiac repair. It was a demonstration that clinical excellence could not be compromised by institutional politics, that patient care remained the supreme value in medical practice, and that physicians would fight to protect the fundamental principles of their profession. As Marcus approached the operating table, he felt the presence of every colleague who had supported him, every patient who had been affected by administrative interference, and every future physician who would benefit from the protections that his case had initiated. The real healing was about to begin, not just for Margaret Holloway's heart, but for the medical profession itself. The steady beep of Margaret Holloway's heart monitor filled operating room 3 with the most beautiful sound Dr. Marcus Bennett had ever heard. After 4 hours of intricate surgery, her heart was beating strong and steady, pumping oxygenated blood through the 3 new bypass grafts that would give her many more years of life. The cardiac monitor displayed perfect rhythms. Her blood pressure was stable, and her oxygen saturation remained at optimal levels. Closing, Marcus announced to his surgical team, beginning the methodical process of suturing the layers of tissue that would heal Margaret's chest. Each stitch represented not just surgical technique, but vindication of the principle that medical decisions belonged in the hands of physicians, not administrators. Sarah Chun handed him the final sutures with the precision that had made their partnership so effective over the past 3 years. Roberto Martinez monitored the heart-lung machine as Margaret's own heart gradually took over full circulation. Dr. Amanda Foster carefully managed the transition from surgical anesthesia to post-operative sedation. "Heart function looks excellent," Dr. Foster reported, studying the echocardiogram images that showed Margaret's heart contracting with renewed strength. "The grafts are patent and flowing well. This is a textbook result." As Marcus completed the final sutures, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 4 days ago, administrative interference had nearly cost Margaret her life. Today, surgical excellence had not only saved her, but had also established a precedent that would protect countless other patients from similar interference. The surgical team moved Margaret to the cardiac recovery unit, where her family waited with barely contained anxiety. When Marcus emerged from the operating room and approached them, still wearing his surgical scrubs, Sarah Patterson immediately stood to meet him. "Dr. Bennett, how is she?" "The surgery was completely successful," Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet satisfaction that came with a perfectly executed procedure. "Your mother's heart is working better than it has in years. The bypass grafts are functioning perfectly, and her prognosis is excellent." Sarah burst into tears of relief, embracing her brother as years of worry finally released. Margaret's son-in-law shook Marcus's hand with gratitude that needed no words. These were the moments that reminded Marcus why he had chosen medicine, why the fight against administrative interference had been worth every sleepless night and legal battle. As Margaret's family celebrated in the waiting room, Marcus walked to his office to process the events of the past week. His desk was covered with messages from colleagues, medical students, patients, and even complete strangers who had followed his case in the media. The support was overwhelming, but it also carried the weight of responsibility for the movement he had inadvertently started. Dr. Jennifer Walsh knocked on his door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the exhausted but satisfied expression of someone who had fought alongside him throughout the ordeal. "Margaret's stable in recovery," she reported, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Her family is ecstatic, and rightfully so. You saved her life, Marcus, in more ways than one." Marcus sipped his coffee and looked out the window at the Portland skyline. It was never just about Margaret, was it? This whole thing was about whether we're going to let administrators dictate medical practice based on cost considerations rather than patient care. "And now we have our answer," Jennifer replied. "The medical community spoke with one voice, and the legal system supported us. Mills are finished, not just here but everywhere. No hospital will hire him after what came out in court." The aftermath of the federal court ruling had been swift and comprehensive. Dr. Harrison Mills had been terminated immediately, his administrative license suspended pending a state investigation into his pattern of discriminatory behavior. 3 other administrators who had enabled his misconduct had also been removed from their positions. More importantly, Riverside Medical Center's board of directors had implemented new policies that gave physicians unprecedented protection from administrative retaliation. Clinical decisions could no longer be overruled by non-medical administrators, and any attempt to suspend physician privileges required peer review by board-certified specialists in the relevant field. Marcus's phone rang with a call from David Kellerman, who had spent the past day fielding media requests and managing the legal fallout from the case. "Marcus, I have news that you need to hear. The Department of Justice has opened an investigation into Mills's previous hospital in Houston. Apparently, your case prompted 3 other physicians to come forward with discrimination complaints that were previously buried under non-disclosure agreements." The revelation didn't surprise Marcus, but it confirmed the systematic nature of the problem. Mills hadn't been an isolated bad actor. He had been part of a culture that prioritized financial metrics over medical integrity. "David, what's the scope of the federal investigation?" "Broader than we initially expected. The DOJ is examining whether there's a pattern of healthcare administrators using discriminatory practices to suppress physician advocacy for patient care. Your case may have exposed a nationwide problem." As the conversation continued, Marcus learned that congressional hearings were being planned to examine administrative interference in medical practice. Professional medical organizations were drafting new ethical guidelines. State medical boards were reviewing their oversight procedures to prevent future abuse of credentialing processes. That evening, Marcus received a call that would define the next phase of his career. Dr. Helen Washington from the American College of Surgeons was following up on her earlier offer for him to chair the new Committee on Physician Protection. "Marcus, we've received overwhelming support for this initiative from medical professionals across all specialties. We want to establish comprehensive protections that will prevent what happened to you from happening to any other physician. The committee would have significant resources and authority to investigate administrative interference, establish national standards for physician protection, and provide legal support for medical professionals facing retaliation." It represented an opportunity to transform his personal experience into systematic change that would benefit the entire medical community. "Dr. Washington, I accept the position. We need to ensure that clinical excellence is protected from administrative pressure. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood at the podium of the American Medical Association's annual convention, addressing an audience of 5,000 physicians, medical students, and healthcare professionals. The Margaret Holloway case had become a symbol of the broader struggle to maintain medical integrity in an increasingly corporate healthcare environment. "Colleagues," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the convention center's main auditorium, "what happened to me at Riverside Medical Center was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a culture that has allowed non-medical administrators to override clinical judgment based on financial considerations." The audience was completely silent, understanding that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in the evolution of medical practice. Marcus continued with the same precision he brought to cardiac surgery. Margaret Holloway nearly died because an administrator decided that cost efficiency was more important than surgical expertise. That can never be allowed to happen again. We must establish protections that ensure medical decisions remain in the hands of medical professionals. The standing ovation that followed lasted for several minutes, with physicians from across the country expressing their support for the reforms that Marcus was championing. Medical students in the audience saw him as a role model who had demonstrated that individual physicians could successfully challenge institutional corruption. The Committee on Physician Protection had already begun its work, investigating dozens of cases where administrative interference had compromised patient care. They were developing legal frameworks that would give physicians recourse against retaliation, establishing peer review standards that prevented abuse of credentialing processes, and creating support networks for medical professionals facing administrative pressure. 6 months after the Riverside Medical Center incident, Marcus received an invitation that brought the transformation full circle. Margaret Holloway, fully recovered from her cardiac surgery, had asked him to attend her granddaughter's medical school graduation at Oregon Health and Science University. The ceremony took place on a bright spring day, with families gathered to celebrate the next generation of physicians entering the profession. Marcus sat with Margaret's family as her granddaughter Emily Patterson walked across the stage to receive her medical degree. After the ceremony, Emily approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. "Dr. Bennett, I want you to know that your case inspired me to specialize in cardiothoracic surgery. When I heard how you fought to protect patient care from administrative interference, I knew that was the kind of physician I wanted to become." Margaret herself looked healthier than she had in years, her surgical scars hidden beneath an elegant blue dress. "Dr. Bennett, I read in the newspaper that hospitals across the country are implementing new protections for physicians because of what happened with my case. I'm proud that my surgery contributed to something larger." The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Sarah Kim, a first-year resident who had been following Marcus's career since his legal victory. "Dr. Bennett, I wanted to thank you for showing us that physicians can successfully challenge institutional injustice. Your example gives us hope that we can prioritize patient care throughout our careers." As Marcus reflected on the transformations that had occurred, he realized that the Margaret Holloway case had accomplished far more than restoring his surgical privileges or exposing administrative corruption. It had demonstrated that the medical community could unite to protect the fundamental principles of healthcare when those principles were threatened. The Physician Protection Act, drafted by Marcus's committee and introduced in Congress, was gaining bipartisan support from legislators who understood that healthcare quality depended on protecting clinical decision-making from inappropriate administrative interference. Medical schools were incorporating ethics courses that taught students to recognize and resist institutional pressure to compromise patient care. Most importantly, a new generation of physicians was entering the profession with the understanding that clinical excellence required not just medical knowledge, but also the courage to advocate for patients against institutional obstacles. 3 years later, Dr. Marcus Bennett stood in Operating Room 3 at Riverside Medical Center, preparing for another cardiac surgery. The hospital had been transformed by the reforms that followed his case. With new leadership that prioritized clinical excellence over financial metrics, his surgical team included Dr. Emily Patterson, who had completed her residency and was now training in cardiothoracic surgery under his mentorship. The cycle of knowledge and advocacy was continuing with physicians who understood that their primary responsibility was to their patients, not to administrators. As Marcus made the first incision, he reflected on the patient whose life had sparked a nationwide transformation in medical practice. Margaret Holloway was thriving 3 years after her surgery, spending time with her grandchildren and tending to the garden that had become her passion during recovery. The heart-lung machine hummed quietly in the corner, operated by Roberto Martinez, who had become a leading advocate for protecting surgical team autonomy from administrative interference. Dr. Amanda Foster monitored anesthesia with the confidence that came from working in an environment where clinical decisions were respected and supported. "Scalpel," Marcus said, beginning another procedure that would save a life and uphold the principles that made medicine a noble profession. Outside the operating room, the healthcare system continued to evolve in ways that honored the legacy of the Margaret Holloway case. Physicians across the country practiced with the security that came from legal protections against administrative retaliation. Medical students learned not just anatomy and physiology, but also the ethical frameworks necessary to advocate for patients throughout their careers. The transformation that began with one surgeon's refusal to accept administrative injustice had created a healthcare system where clinical excellence was protected, patient advocacy was celebrated, and the fundamental mission of medicine remained paramount. In operating room 3, Dr. Marcus Bennett continued the work he was born to do, healing hearts and protecting the integrity of medical practice for generations of physicians yet to come. The real victory wasn't just in the courtroom or the operating room, but in the knowledge that his stand had made healthcare better for countless patients who would never know his name but would benefit from his courage. The heart monitor beeped steadily, marking time for both the patient on the table and the transformed profession that surrounded them. Every beat represented a future where medicine remained focused on its highest calling, healing those who needed care, regardless of administrative convenience or financial pressure. The legacy lived on in every surgery, every patient saved, and every physician who understood that true healing required not just medical skill, but moral courage. Dr. Marcus Bennett had given the medical profession both, and the ripple effects would continue long after the last suture was tied. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us